"I'm not asking for your money," she said, her voice low but unwavering. "I just want to help you walk again." The words hung in the air, like dust caught in sunlight, unexpected and unwelcome. Graham Whitmore blinked once slowly, as if trying to process whether he had just imagined it. Then a half-laugh escaped his mouth, not a laugh of humor, but something colder, sharper. He lifted his gaze from the untouched glass of scotch on the table and stared at the woman standing just outside the velvet cord that separated staff from guests. She wore the signature navy blue janitor's uniform of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Her hands still gloved the scent of disinfectant, clinging faintly to her. Her posture was straight proud, even though exhaustion clung to her shoulders like a second skin. "You want to help me walk," Graham repeated, his voice dry with disbelief. "Do you usually perform medical miracles between mopping restrooms?" The room was private, reserved for high-tier guests only. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears, and a soft piano hummed through hidden speakers. No one else was there, just him, his wheelchair, and a woman whose presence should have been invisible. She didn't flinch. "I said what I meant," she replied, "and I meant it." Graham stared harder, waiting for the punchline. But there wasn't one, just her eyes hazel and steady, like someone who had seen too many things to be afraid of arrogance. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting the lap blanket that covered his legs, a faint shift that betrayed how little sensation he had below the waist, or so he believed. "You don't know anything about me," he said finally. "I know enough," she answered. "You haven't fired your physical therapist in 6 weeks because you haven't had one. You sit through every night in this room but never finish your drink. And you flinch when lightning hits, even though your body shouldn't feel it. But it does." Silence. He could have called for security. He could have made her disappear with a single command. He was Graham Whitmore after all. The name meant power, precision, control. And yet he didn't move, didn't speak. "I'm not a doctor," she added, "but I was a licensed rehabilitation nurse before things changed. I know what fear looks like when it's hiding under the word impossible." Graham finally raised an eyebrow. "And what is it you think you see in me?" "Not someone broken," she said quietly. "Someone hiding." He gave a slow, deliberate laugh. "You're bold," he said. "I'll give you that." "I'm tired," she corrected him. "And tired people stop pretending." She reached into the side pocket of her uniform and pulled out a small folded note. No branding, no ego, just a name and number. She walked to his table, stopped short of touching it, and placed the note gently beside the untouched scotch. "I work nights. If you ever get tired of sitting still, call me." Then she turned and walked away. Behind her, Graham stared at the note for a long time. He did not throw it away. Not yet. And when he finally looked up to call the maitre d', his voice came out quieter than he expected. "What's her name?" "Riley, sir," the man answered awkwardly. "Riley Grant." Graham didn't say anything else, but his fingers, once still and cold, twitched just slightly under the blanket. Graham Whitmore didn't believe in silence. He cultivated it. His townhouse in the Upper East Side was a cathedral of quiet, all-clean lines and cold light, the kind of place where even echoes felt unwelcome. The floors were polished marble, the art abstract and expensive, the books neatly arranged but untouched. After the accident, he had removed every mirror except one. That one sat in the corner of his study where he couldn't avoid it, where he was forced to look. His reflection mocked him now, the once powerful CEO of Whitmore International, reduced to a man who couldn't feel his legs and refused to feel anything else. 8 months ago, Graham had entered an elevator in a corporate tower in Miami. A snapped cable, a 40-foot drop. No spinal damage, said the scans, but paralysis still came. They called it conversion disorder, a term he detested, like being told the pain wasn't real just because they couldn't see it. He fired 3 therapists in the first month, refused the 4th, and when the 5th tried to make him cry, he threatened to sue. It wasn't just the legs, it was the shame, the noise, the voices from his past whispering that weakness meant failure. He built empires from control. Now he couldn't even will his feet to move. But every night he returned to the same private room at the Vermilion Room restaurant. Same table, same drink, same nothing. Until her. Riley Grant didn't believe in miracles. She believed in stubbornness. She believed in showing up even when the world made you want to disappear. Every night at 11 she pushed her mop across the marbled floors of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, her spine aching, her gloves damp, and her thoughts heavy with math. Rent, groceries, field trip permission slips. Sophie, her daughter, deserved more than bleach and paychecks that barely lasted the week. But this was what she had. At 34, Riley had learned to live inside the margins. 10 years ago, she'd been a nurse, then a wife, then a widow. Marcus, her husband, had returned from his 3rd deployment with haunted eyes and hands that trembled in sleep. Riley tried to hold him together, but one night he drove into a lake, leaving behind a truck, a folded flag, and a daughter who still asked why the stars made her sad. Riley went back to work, but grief is greedy. It took her license, her confidence, her sense of direction. One patient died. An inquiry followed. She wasn't charged, but she wasn't cleared either. And that was enough to close every door but cleaning. Still, she noticed things. Janitors always do. While others walked past, Riley watched, and she watched Graham Whitmore for 6 weeks before ever speaking to him. Watched how his eyes didn't follow people but shadows. How his glass was always full but never lifted. How his legs twitched just barely whenever the storm rolled in. Most would miss it, but not Riley. She remembered what it looked like when the body wanted to fight, but the mind told it no, so she said it. Not for drama, not for hope. Just because she'd had enough of pretending he was invisible. That night when she left the restaurant, she didn't expect a call. She just hoped he'd feel something. Anything. And at 3:17 a.m., as she tucked Sophie into bed, Graham's business card fell out of her pocket. She looked at it for a long moment before sliding it into the back of a picture frame on her dresser. The frame held a photo of Marcus in uniform, smiling like he didn't know he'd become a ghost. Riley kissed the glass and whispered, "Maybe this time I'll help someone stay." Graham didn't call. Not the first night, not the second, but on the 3rd, he rolled into the dining room earlier than usual, arriving before the candles were lit, before the pianist touched the keys. He sat at his usual table, the glass of scotch, waiting untouched as always, and then without warning, he pulled the folded note from his jacket pocket and stared at it for a long time. The maitre d' approached with a familiar deference, but Graham didn't acknowledge him. "Have the night staff send up someone new," Graham said. "Tonight I want the floors mopped early." The maitre d' hesitated. "Sir, the evening janitorial crew usually begins after midnight." Graham looked up, voice flat. "Make it work. Riley arrived at 10:47, hair tied back, uniform crisp, even though her shoes betrayed how many hours they'd been on her feet. She didn't expect to see him sitting there, not looking at her but clearly waiting. "You called me here to mop," she asked, setting down her bucket. "I called you here because I haven't moved my left foot in 8 months, he replied. "But last night I had a dream I was running." "Dreams aren't science," she said. "Neither is paralysis without cause," he shot back. She studied him for a long beat. "Do you want to try something?" He didn't answer. She knelt down in front of him, pulled off one glove, and gently tapped the side of his ankle. "Do you feel that?" "No," he said. She moved up to his shin. "Hear nothing." She pressed behind the knee. Still no. Then she placed her hand on his thigh just above the knee. And now Graham tensed. Something he admitted. Not pain, not pressure, just awareness. Riley nodded. "That's where we start." "What exactly is this?" he asked. "You want to fix me?" "No," she said. "I want to see if you're willing to stop hiding from yourself." Over the next 2 weeks, Graham allowed her into his world in increments. 15 minutes at first, then 30. She brought nothing but a small duffel, a worn notebook, and a cheap plastic mirror. He found her methods ridiculous, borderline insulting. "This looks like kindergarten," he said, when she handed him a resistance band. "Then stop acting like a child," she replied calmly. "Flex your hip." He grunted. "It's not moving." "Try again," she said, watching him, not with pity, but with sharp clinical observation. Still nothing. "Your jaw's tense. That means your brain is working. Your brain is firing signals." "That's something." "That's nothing," he snapped. "No, Graham," she said softly. "Nothing is what happens when you quit." He didn't respond, but the next day he was already waiting when she arrived. Sophie came with her once, quietly sketching in the corner while Riley worked. Graham said nothing to the child, but one afternoon he glanced over and noticed her drawing a picture of him stick figure legs, a big smile, and beside it a note in block letters, "You can still stand." He folded the drawing into his pocket and didn't speak of it. One night during a particularly frustrating session, Graham exploded. "Do you have any idea what it's like to fall from 30 feet and wake up unable to feel half your body?" "No," Riley said quietly. "But I know what it's like to watch someone lose their mind because they can't feel anything inside it." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. He stared at her. "Your husband?" She nodded. "PTSD and guilt." "How'd he die?" "He stopped fighting." Graham looked down. "Did you try to save him?" "Every day," she whispered. "And when he died, I didn't get to grieve. I got to answer questions about medical records. I got to fight for custody. I got to scrub floors." He said nothing, but when she reached for his knee, that night his hand brushed hers for the first time, and neither of them pulled away. Something shifted after that. The air between them became less clinical, more charged. Riley noticed the way Graham's eyes followed her when she moved. He noticed how she'd hum softly when she focused, always the same tune, something half-forgotten and haunting. One afternoon, she found him already stretching when she arrived. "Don't act surprised," he said. "You told me repetition builds neurons." She smiled. "Look at you quoting me now." "You're not easy to forget," he said too quickly. The words hung between them. She didn't reply. That night he dreamed again. This time not of running. This time he dreamed of music and a hand reaching for his. Riley brought him a mirror the next day. "Why the mirror?" he asked. "So you can watch your body learn again." "You've stopped looking at yourself, Graham." But healing doesn't happen in the dark. He resisted at first, but eventually he looked. And what he saw wasn't strength or progress. He saw a man tired of pretending to be fine. She placed a notebook in his lap. Write down what you feel, even if it's nothing. Every word is part of the work. He didn't write that night, but the following day, he handed her a page. It read, "Today." I almost felt my heel, or maybe I imagined it. Either way, it scared me, but I didn't want it to stop. Riley read it, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her bag. "That's the first real thing you've given me," she said. He frowned. "Not the leg twitch." "No," she said, "the truth." One evening, Graham stood for 2 seconds using parallel bars. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't fluid, but it was him and it was real. Riley clapped once softly. "Now you're dangerous," she whispered. "Now you know it's possible." He looked at her, sweat beading at his temple. "I didn't think I'd feel proud again." "Pride isn't what we're after," she said. "We're after freedom." "And what about you?" he asked suddenly. "Do you feel free?" She hesitated. "Sometimes, when Sophie laughs. When I don't check my bank account before buying milk. When I see someone try again." "That's sad," he said. "That's life," she replied. He looked away, then back. "You know, I used to think people like you were invisible, just part of the background." "I was," she said. "Until you stopped walking and I started watching." They didn't speak for a while. And when Riley finally stood to leave, Graham surprised her. "Will you come back tomorrow?" "Of course," she said. "This isn't over." "No," he said quietly. "It's just beginning." The weather turned colder as October crept in, and with it came a shift neither of them fully acknowledged, but both quietly felt. Graham no longer asked her to explain herself when she arrived. He stopped pretending the sessions didn't matter. He even started texting once a day, short messages like "legs stiff today," or "didn't sleep," or once simply "thank you." Riley never pried. She replied with suggestions, stretches, or silence when words weren't needed. But beneath that professionalism, a subtle thread pulled tighter between them, a quiet tether neither dared name. Then one morning she arrived to find him already sitting on the mat, not in his chair but on the floor legs sprawled awkwardly in front of him, chest rising and falling with the labored breath of someone who had made that move alone. He didn't greet her. Instead, he said, "I need to tell you something." She knelt down beside him, waiting. "The day of the accident," he began, "wasn't just a freak elevator malfunction." Riley didn't react. She waited. "It was my fault," he continued. "I was supposed to meet someone. I was late. I ran. I took a shortcut through the maintenance hall. There was a service elevator. No one uses it. I ignored the out-of-order sign." He paused, his hands fisting in his lap. "I was rushing to fire someone." "You blame yourself," Riley said softly. "Because I should. I had warning, I had signs. I chose arrogance." "That's not why your legs stopped working," she said. "No. That came later," he admitted. "In the hospital, the doctors said the paralysis wasn't from spinal damage. They called it functional neurological disorder. Trauma-induced, psychological." He laughed bitter. "As if that made it less real." "It doesn't," she said. "Pain is pain even when it doesn't bleed." He looked at her, the vulnerability raw, unfamiliar. "I stopped trying because if I walked again, it meant I had to live again. And I didn't want to. Not really." Riley didn't speak for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is Marcus's last journal entry," she said. "I found it the day after his funeral. I've never read it to anyone." Graham hesitated, then nodded. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. It says, I don't want to die, but I don't know how to be a man who can't protect his family. I feel useless, but when Riley holds my hand, even for a second, I remember who I am. Not a soldier, not a patient, just hers. She folded the page again, eyes shining. He didn't want to die. He just didn't know how to live broken. Graham looked away, throat tight. And you, he asked, how did you keep going? I didn't, she said. I stopped for a while. I was just functioning. For Sophie, for myself. Cleaning bathrooms at 2 a.m. isn't a career goal, but it's real. It keeps you grounded. It reminds you that even if you're invisible, you can still leave things better than you found them. That sounds lonely, he whispered. It was, she admitted. Until you saw me. They sat in silence, two people stitched together by fractures too deep for most to notice. Then he said, I remember her name. Riley tilted her head. Who's the woman I loved before the accident? Maya. She left after the diagnosis. Told me she couldn't be with a man who might never walk again. That wasn't about your legs, Riley said. That was about her fear. Still, he replied, she was the last person who touched me before everything changed. Riley looked at him, then a softness in her eyes that had nothing to do with pity. Then it's time someone else rewrites that story. And without asking, she took his hand. Not as a therapist, not as a nurse, as a woman who understood what it meant to fall and stay fallen until someone reminded you that you were still worthy of rising. Later that night, Graham lay in bed unable to sleep. The room was silent, but his mind wasn't. He kept replaying her words, her touch, the way she hadn't flinched when he told the truth. No one had ever stayed past the confessions. No one had ever looked at his brokenness and called it unfinished instead of ruined. He reached for the journal she'd given him, flipped to a blank page, and began to write. Today I realized I'm not paralyzed. I'm afraid. Afraid of walking back into a world that expects me to be who I was before. But maybe I don't need to be him again. Maybe I can be something new. The next morning, Riley found him standing at the bars before she arrived, gripping tightly, legs shaking but planted. You didn't wait for me, she teased. I wanted to see if I could do it for myself, he replied. Did you? No, he said, smiling faintly. But I wanted to. That's something right. That's everything she said. Desire is the first step back to life. He looked at her differently that day, not just as the woman who pushed him physically, but as someone who carried pieces of him he hadn't dared examine alone. Why are you still here? He asked quietly. Because you remind me, she answered. Remind you of what? That I can still help someone stand, even if the world thinks I've fallen too far. He looked away, then back. You haven't, he said. You haven't fallen. Maybe not, she said, but I've been crawling for a long time. Then maybe we walk together, he said. She didn't reply, but her eyes did. That night she brought Sophie with her again. Graham opened the door himself. Sophie handed him another drawing. This time it was the three of them. Him standing, her holding his hand, Riley smiling. At the top, Sophie had written, I think this is what family looks like. Graham stared at the paper for a long time. Then he whispered, You're not wrong. Riley watched from behind, heart caught in her throat. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe broken things didn't need fixing. Maybe they just needed to be seen, held, and walked beside. And sometimes that was how healing began. Quietly, with no applause, no miracle, just two people who had stopped pretending they were fine, and a child who drew the truth long before either of them dared say it aloud. It started with a headline. Riley didn't see it at first. She was folding laundry in her apartment, humming absently, while Sophie colored at the table. Her phone buzzed once, twice, then again. When she finally picked it up, she saw the messages flooding in, from coworkers, old friends, even a nurse she hadn't spoken to in years. One of the messages simply said, "Is this real?" with a link. She clicked it. The article was from a mid-tier gossip site, but the headline screamed louder than truth. From janitor to lover. Inside, the unlikely bond between Graham Whitmore and his mystery maid. Her chest tightened. The photo showed her and Graham outside his townhouse. A grainy, zoomed-in shot that caught her hand on his arm as he tried to stand at the parallel bars they had set up on his terrace. There were no quotes, no facts, just speculation, cheap innuendo, and comments that stung more than she admitted. Gold digger, opportunist, fake nurse. She sat on the couch numb as the words blurred together. Then a second wave of headlines followed. Billionaire's comeback, fueled by charity case, Whitmore heir or Whitmore hoax. She didn't cry, not right away. Instead, she packed her duffel bag quietly, told Sophie to get her coat, and left a single note taped to the inside of Graham's gate. It read, "I never wanted the world to know your pain. I only wanted you to remember you were still alive. I'm sorry I let them take that from you. I'm walking away so you can keep going forward." Graham didn't see the note until he returned home that night. At first, he thought she was late. Then he realized she wasn't coming. He called her once, no answer. He texted, nothing. For 3 days' silence. The sessions stopped. The house felt louder, emptier. He tried to continue the exercises alone, but the bars felt colder without her beside him. He read through the article again, line by line, looking for what hurt most. It wasn't the speculation. It was the implication that she had used him, that what they had wasn't real. And the part that broke him was knowing she believed walking away would protect him. On the 4th day, he stood without help for 5 full seconds. On the 5th, he walked 4 steps along the mat before collapsing back into his chair. He hadn't called his assistant. He hadn't told anyone. Because what was the point of progress if the only person he wanted to share it with wasn't there? On the 6th night, he drove himself slow, clumsy, stubborn to her apartment building, only to find the security guards say she hadn't come back since Wednesday. That night, he sat in his chair by the fire and stared at her notebook still left behind. Inside was a folded drawing from Sophie. He opened it and saw the child's handwriting scrawled in pink marker, "Don't let Mommy go invisible again." The next morning he found her. It took 3 calls a favor from his sister and an uncomfortable conversation with a church volunteer. She was at a free community clinic downtown, assisting with mobility therapy for low-income patients. When he entered, he saw her across the room, helping a teenager adjust crutches. Her back turned, her hair tied in that familiar loose knot. She didn't see him at first, but when she turned and met his eyes, something in her froze. He walked toward her, no chair, no cane, just uneven, halting steps, powered by something deeper than muscles. When he stopped in front of her, the room went quiet, not because of who he was, but because of how he looked at her. "You didn't answer," he said. "Because I didn't know what to say," she replied. "Then let me say it first." He reached into his coat and handed her the drawing. "She asked me not to let you go invisible again." Riley looked down, eyes stinging. They twisted everything she whispered. "I know," he said, "but they didn't touch what matters. You could lose your reputation." "Then let them take it," he said. "I've spent half my life building an image. You helped me build something real. Graham, I never wanted." He interrupted her. "I walked 4 steps alone, Riley. And it meant nothing without you." "You don't need me," she said, voice cracking. "You're wrong," he replied. "I don't need you to heal me. I need you because I finally stopped pretending I was fine. And you're the only person who stayed long enough to see the man behind the mask." She didn't answer. She just stared at him, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm not asking you to fix me," he said. "I'm asking you to walk beside me. Even if it's slow, even if it's messy." Riley finally nodded, a tiny motion that shattered whatever walls remained between them. "I never wanted to leave," she whispered. "Then don't," he said. That afternoon, they returned to his home together. No reporters, no drama, just a man and a woman starting over. He rolled the mat out. She knelt beside it. They worked in silence, but the air felt lighter. That night, Graham stood for 6 seconds and took 5 steps. Riley smiled. "You're almost running," she said. "Not yet," he replied. "But I'm not afraid of falling anymore." She touched his shoulder gently. "That's what courage feels like." Later, as they sat together near the window, Sophie asleep on the couch, Riley turned to him. "You didn't have to come find me." "I didn't come to find you," he said. "I came to bring you home." Riley leaned her head on his shoulder. "I didn't think anyone would ever do that again." "Then you've been hanging around the wrong people," he whispered. They sat like that until the fire dimmed, wrapped not in romance, but in something stronger, trust forged from truth, not fantasy. And when she closed her eyes that night, it wasn't escape she felt. It was peace. The kind that comes not from being saved, but from being seen. There was a shift in the way she looked at him after that night, subtle but impossible to ignore. It wasn't just affection or gratitude. It was something deeper, something like belief. Graham noticed it every time her eyes lingered a moment longer, or when her hand rested on his shoulder, without the excuse of balance or guidance. And yet neither of them spoke about it, not directly. They buried it beneath routines, beneath progress charts and small victories. But healing has a way of dragging buried feelings to the surface, whether you're ready or not. It happened one morning when Graham was practicing weight shifts from one leg to the other. Riley stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with quiet intensity. "Breathe," she said. "I am." "You're holding it in your chest," she said. "Let it drop into your belly. Let your body know you trust it." He tried again. This time it was smoother, more natural. Riley smiled. Better. He paused. "You know you've never answered my question." "Which one?" "The one I never asked," he said. She tilted her head. "What do you mean? Why did you come up to me that night at the restaurant, really?" Riley was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Because I saw something in you that reminded me of what I almost became." "And what's that?" he asked. "Someone who chooses to stop moving, even when the path forward is still there." Graham studied her. "You saw my paralysis as a choice." "Not at first," she admitted, "but yes, eventually. Not because you wanted to be helpless, but because you didn't want to risk hoping again." He sat down, breath shaky. "You're not wrong. Neither were you," she said. "You saw through me, too. You saw that I wasn't just a janitor, that I was still a healer, even if the world forgot." He reached over and took her hand gently. "I didn't forget." She didn't pull away. For the first time since they met, there was no space between them, no labels, no roles. Just skin against skin, breath sinking slowly, and a silence that spoke louder than anything else. That afternoon, Graham walked from one end of the room to the other without holding the bars. Riley clapped once softly, and he turned to face her face-flushed eyes bright. "I didn't think I'd feel this alive again," he said. "You're not just alive," she replied. "You're becoming." But becoming comes with consequences, and neither of them was prepared for what came next. A letter arrived that evening, slipped under the door in a plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single sentence printed in bold black ink. "No matter how far you walk, your past walks faster." Riley read it twice, heart sinking. Graham took it from her hand, read it, and went silent. "It's someone from your past," she said. "Yes." "Do you know who I can guess?" he replied. "A former partner, a board member, someone who benefited from me staying small." "What will you do?" she asked. "What I didn't do before," he said. "Face it." But fear returned that night. Graham tossed and turned dreams, twisting into memories he'd buried. His father's voice sharp and cold, telling him as a boy to walk it off. His mentor reminding him that failure was just weakness in disguise. And Maya, her voice echoing. "I didn't sign up for this." He woke with a start, sweat-soaked legs numb again. Riley came into the room, eyes wide with concern. "What happened? I forgot," he whispered. "Forgot what?" "That healing isn't permanent, that some days you fall again." She came to him, knelt by his side. "Falling doesn't erase the steps you've taken, it just reminds you they mattered." He looked at her pain raw in his expression. "I'm terrified, Riley, of what that I'll never be enough. Not as a man, not as a leader, not for you." Her face softened. "Graham, do you know what Sophie said to me yesterday?" "What she said, I like him because he listens to me when I talk." He blinked. "That's it. That's everything she said. You don't have to be a hero. You just have to be here." He closed his eyes. "But what if I break again?" She leaned forward. "Then I'll sit beside you until you remember how to rebuild." The next morning he stood in front of a mirror, shirtless, the scars along his spine catching the light. Riley stood behind him watching. "What do you see?" she asked. "A man," he said. "Not perfect, not whole, but still standing." "That's enough," she whispered. He turned to face her. "I don't want to be alone anymore." "You're not," she replied. And then she kissed him. It wasn't a kiss of passion or desperation. It was slow, steady, like the first breath after holding too much in. When it broke, he rested his forehead against hers. "You scare me," he said. "Why, because you see me," he said. "Even the parts I hate. I don't hate them," she replied. "They make you human." That night, he invited her and Sophie to stay. Not permanently, not yet, just for now. They cooked together badly. Sophie told jokes that didn't make sense, and Graham laughed like he hadn't in years. Later, after Sophie fell asleep on the couch, Riley and Graham sat in the quiet kitchen sipping tea. "Do you think this is real?" he asked. "It feels real," she said. "But what if it breaks?" "Then we fix it," she replied. "Together." He reached for her hand again, and this time she met him halfway. "No headlines," he said. "No statements. Just us." "Just us," she echoed. And for the first time in his adult life, Graham didn't feel like a name. He felt like a man who had been broken, a man who had fallen, but more importantly, a man who was now learning how to walk towards something that felt like home. The sun rose quietly over the city, golden light, slipping through the tall windows of Graham's home like a promise kept. Riley stood in the kitchen, barefoot, wrapped in a worn cardigan, watching the kettle begin to steam. Graham entered behind her, walking without support, his steps uneven but sure. She turned when she heard him and smiled. Not the polite kind, but the kind that said, "I see you and I'm still here." He took the cup she handed him, their fingers brushing, and for a moment neither spoke. Then he said, "It's strange waking up and not feeling like a ghost." She sipped her tea. "It's not strange, it's earned." He looked down at her hand, the tiny scar across her knuckle. The slight tremble when she was tired, all the things he hadn't noticed, when she was just the janitor in the corner. "Do you regret it?" he asked, "coming to my table that night?" She shook her head. "I regret waiting 6 weeks before I did." He laughed softly. "I was horrible to you." "You were broken," she said. "So was I. It's what made us see each other." Later that morning, the three of them, Graham, Riley, and Sophie, walked through Central Park. No headlines, no cameras, just a man walking with a cane, a woman who had stopped hiding, and a little girl who refused to color inside the lines. They stopped by the duck pond. Sophie fed breadcrumbs, giggling as one bird snapped too close to her shoe. Graham watched her eyes soft. "She doesn't flinch at much, does she?" "She used to," Riley said. "Until she saw that falling doesn't mean failing." He looked at her, then truly looked. "You taught her that." "No," she said. "She taught me." At the end of the path, Sophie ran ahead, arms wide, like wings spinning in circles. Riley watched her for a moment, then turned to Graham. "What now?" he smiled. "Now we live. Now we build something that doesn't need to be perfect to be real." That evening, Graham wrote his first personal statement in years, not to investors or press, but to himself. He wrote, "Today I walked without fear, not because I'm healed, but because I'm no longer hiding. And I didn't do it alone." He printed it out, folded it once, and tucked it behind the photo of his mother on his nightstand. Across the room, Riley curled up on the couch, reading aloud to Sophie from a book they'd borrowed from the community clinic. Her voice was soft, steady home. Graham watched them, heartful, in a way he'd forgotten was possible. He crossed the room, sat beside them, and took Riley's hand. "You didn't save me," he said quietly. "You reminded me I was worth saving myself." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And you did the same for me." Later that night, after Sophie was asleep and the world had gone still, Riley whispered into the quiet, "Maybe broken isn't the end." Graham pulled her closer and replied, "No, maybe it's just the beginning." Outside, the city pulsed on, but inside 3 hearts beat in rhythm, not waiting for a miracle, not chasing perfection, just choosing every day to walk forward together. And sometimes that choice was the bravest love of all.